Hi, Paul Turley here. I would just like to walk you through a few very simple things that every Power BI new user needs to know. And Power BI is a great tool. It's a fairly easy tool to get started with, but there are a few gotchas that everybody experiences, and I'm just going to walk you through just a few of these items. It doesn't matter how simple or how complex the project is, your data model is, what your data looks like. What I'm going to show you right now are some things that everyone experiences, and they can be very, very simple gotchas and landmines. The first thing is that Power BI, like most business intelligence tools, really exists for the purpose of grouping and aggregating data. Now, that's not to say that we can't use it for detail level reporting. We can, and we can work with a lot of data, but by default it wants to group and it wants to aggregate, and sometimes that's not what we want it to do. I have a table here I've just created, and this is just to simplify things, but I'm going to work with a single table. You would experience the same thing if you were working with multiple tables in a data model. As you can see, I have a name column with the name of some of my favorite cartoon characters. I have a location, and I have a numeric column that I want to report on. We're going to call that my measure or my implicit measure column. It's just a column of numbers. And just keep in mind that we've got 3 records for Fred, 2 records for Barney, 2 for Wilma, etc. And you'll notice that those are in combination with different locations. Now I'm going to switch back to a blank report page. And I would like to see the number of shells that are sold to a customer at a location. And so I'm going to drag and drop the name column onto my report canvas, and that's going to create this table of names. Now, the first thing that I notice is the text is very small. So I want to bump up the text. I'm looking up here, looking on all of my ribbons for a place to bump up the text, and I can't figure out how to do that. So the first thing is that you need to make sure that you have this visual selected. This is a table visual. There you can see that that's a table. And I can move that around, and it can get a little confusing because when the table's already selected and I go to grab it, that it doesn't always move. If you click off of the table and then I hover over it and I grab it with the left mouse button, then I can move it around, but that might seem to be a little inconsistent. I can also resize it, but this white table over the white background, it's hard to see where that table is. So what I'm going to do is I want to bump up the text. So I'm going to go to the paint roller. You can see that this is the format option. It's simple once you've done it a few times with this table visual selected. And when I choose the paint roller, I get to the formatting options. I'm going to go down to grid, and here you can see that I can bump up the text size. So I can just spin that up to, let's say, 14 points. That's a whole lot easier to read. So this is unique combinations or unique values in that column, so I'm only seeing 4 of them right now. I'm going to add location. Now I can drag and drop into the visual, or with the visual selected, if I'm looking at the field list, then I can also drag and drop into what we call the field wells. This is the field list. These are the field wells for the selected visual. So now you're seeing the unique combination of name and location. And I'll drag shells into the field wells. And notice that for Fred, I only see 2 rows. So if I'm looking at the rows for Fred, how do I know if these are detail rows or if they're being rolled up? Now, if we go back and we look at the table, we can figure that out pretty easily. But if I'm just coming into this data for the first time, I may not be able to tell how many rows or records there are in the underlying tables behind this visual. So how can I figure that out so that I can validate this data and make sure that my data is accurate? Well, The best thing that you can do is get a row count. And there are a couple different ways to get a row count. If I were just to drag and drop one of these fields that I've already used into the visual here, I can drop this down and I can say, let's count that. I don't want to count it distinctly. I just want to count it. And that gives me a row count because it's the count of the number of occurrences of location. And here you can see that this row in this table visual actually represents 2 records in the underlying table. And so that actually kind of solves this puzzle for me by letting me know that, oh, okay, 104.08, that's actually the sum of the shells for 2 underlying records where the name is Fred and the location is Bedrock, where there are actually 2 records that represent that. Okay, so that solves mystery number 1. Now, another thing that I can do is I can actually drag and drop location onto the report canvas, and then I can switch this to count, and that just gives me an overall count. I'll switch that to a card visual, which makes that a little bit bigger. So now I can reconcile the number of rows that I see here, which is 6, against the number of records in my table, which is 8, knowing that there's at least one row here that consists of 2 or more underlying records in the table. So that's an easy way to resolve that. All right, item number 2 is, how do I know where these visuals are on the page? I see that I've resized this and there's white space all over the place, and that's not real intuitive. So what I like to do in new reports is I will choose the background of the report canvas, go to the paint roller, and make sure that we're looking at page information. So you should see that I have this property group called page background. Again, that's because I just clicked on the background of my page. I'm going to go to the page background, and I'm going to set the background color to a light shade of gray. Now notice that it doesn't change, and that's because by default the background of a page has 100% transparency. Why? I don't know. But if I change that, you can see that's now a very light shade of gray. And you see that my table also is transparent. And so I'm going to go to the paint roller here, and I'm going to turn the background on, which does show me a slightly different background color. The default background is going to be white. I'm just going to double check that it is white, and I'll set the background transparency to 0%. And I prefer to see solid colored visuals sitting on a light gray background, because now I can see where things are, and it's much easier for me to differentiate where those visuals start and stop. And that goes a long ways toward helping my users understand what they're seeing on this report. So what if I didn't want to roll up the name and location to a single row on this table? How can I see my detail records regardless of whether the name and location are the same or not? The fact of the matter is that Power BI is always going to group on any fields that have the same value. So you have to have a unique column. You have to have a unique value that you can group on. And that's the purpose of this unique ID column. Now, before I just show you that I can use that, I want to show you something that happens with any numeric column by default in Power BI. And that is that numeric columns are always automatically set to summarize. That's what this little sigma icon is just to the left of this field. When you see that, we do want the shells column to roll up. We do want that to be summed, but we want to be able to group on this unique ID and use it to make sure that we get our detail rows. So I need to come over here to the Modeling tab, and I'm going to drop down the default summarization and set this to Do Not Summarize, and that gets rid of that little sigma icon. And now if I have my table selected, and then when I drag and drop that, oh, look at that. It's going to give me a count by default. So it's even overriding my summarization, and I have to tell it not to summarize right here in the field list. And now I'm actually getting one row in the table visual for every record in the underlying table, and that's exactly what I wanted. Unfortunately, there's no way to hide or get rid of this unique ID column. If I didn't want it, I can just make that wide, and I can resize the table. I could get rid of the header text if I wanted to, but that column does need to be there in order to show detailed records in this case where I don't have unique values in other columns. So hopefully that helps kind of dispel some very simple quandaries and some things that a lot of new users struggle with just a little bit. And best of luck as you're getting started with Power BI.